everybody's here. My name is Caitlin from Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi, and joined tonight by Sean Flynn, author of Why Peacocks. See behind me, An Unlikely Search for Meaning in the World's Most Magnificent Bird, and he's joined in conversation by Aimee Nezhukumatathil in Oxford, Mississippi, and we are so proud to be putting this event on with our friends down in Jackson, Lemuria Books. Hillary is going to be moderating the Q&A later this evening, but before we kind of dive in, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Can y'all hear the peacocks? There's
Yeah.
peacocks there. So just a couple quick upcoming events. This Wednesday, May 19th at 5:30 p.m. Central Time, we'll have Maggie Shipstead in conversation with Book Page Deputy Editor Kat Ackery for Maggie's Great Circle. This is high-flying literary fiction. I think everyone on staff who's read the book won't stop talking about it. We're really excited to have her. It's going to be a lot of fun. Then next Tuesday, May 19th at 5:30, we're welcoming back our friend Jim Shepard in celebration of his latest novel, Phase 6. We're calling it a prophetic pathogen thriller. It's a spare and gripping novel about the next pandemic. He actually completed this book before COVID-19 emerged, and this reads like a fictional sequel to our current crisis. And then next Thursday, May 27th, we have Monica West in conversation with Kiese Lehman in celebration of Monica's debut revival season. And Patrick calls it Tender and Wise, and it tells the story of a daughter of one of the South's most famous Baptist preachers who later discovers a shocking secret about her father that puts her at odds with both her faith and her family. It's really powerful. Monica's one to watch. Don't miss that event. But enough about them. Let's talk about Sean and Aimee. Sean Flynn is a National Magazine Award-winning journalist and author who's reported from 6 continents during the past 30 years. A longtime correspondent for GQ, his work has been widely anthologized and translated into nearly a dozen languages. He lives in North Carolina with his wife and 2 boys, and as y'all can see, peacocks. Aimee Nezhukumatathil is the New York Times bestselling author of World of Wonders, In Praise of Fireflies, Whale Sharks, and Other Astonishments. She's the finalist, or it was the finalist for the Kirkus Prize in Nonfiction, and recently named Barnes & Noble's Book of the Year. She's the author of 4 books of poetry and the poetry editor, I think the first ever poetry editor of Sierra, the national magazine of the Sierra Club. Awards for her writing include a fellowship from the Mississippi Arts Council, the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award for Poetry, National Endowment of the Arts, and the Guggenheim Foundation. She is a professor of English and creative writing at the University of Mississippi's MFA program here in Oxford. And I think that she said that peacocks are her favorite birds. So this is going to be a great conversation. Enough for me. I'm going to pass it on to Aimee and Sean. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you so much, Hillary at Lemuria Books. Sean, I'm so excited to chat with you. I've just enjoyed this book so much. It is not, my close friends know this. This is not just saying, oh yeah, sure, I love this book. I've loved the peacocks since basically 3rd grade, since my first visit to India, and my grandmother had them kind of walking all over her yard in Kerala, and I write about them in my current book. So I was so excited to see a whole book devoted to this creature, this very kind of sometimes misunderstood creature. I wondered if you could just start us off for people who don't know, or maybe who are dubious about peacocks. Can you start us off with just maybe the origins of, and I'm always walking the line of, I don't want to give too much away that's in the book, but it's a great story of how you acquired these peacocks. Can you give in a nutshell without giving too much away?
Yeah, sure. It was.
How does one come to have 3 peacocks in their Zoom background, for example?
Well, it was very spontaneous. My wife and I, Louise, we are typically not very impulsive people, but this was a very impulsive purchase. Where we live in an old farmhouse, but we're nowhere close to a farm. It's just we're the remnants of a farm in suburbia, basically, in Durham, North Carolina. But we had some chickens and a farmhouse and a barn, so it sort of looked like we lived on a farm. And a friend of ours knew someone who lived on a real farm who was trying to get rid of her peacocks. So we just got a text that said, "Would you like some peacocks? Would you like a peacock?"
Yeah,
Yeah. So Louise, being a big fan of Flannery O'Connor, immediately said yes. Flannery O'Connor, of course, famously raised peacocks. So we went to see the peacocks, and Louise had a change of heart because they're, as you can see, they're fairly large birds.
They're intense. Yeah.
But I had never seen one up close. I'm not sure I'd ever even seen one in a zoo before. And they were fascinating. They were just absolutely stunning to me. It sounds almost silly now, but the colors, it's especially the blue of the breast that was, on this dusty horse farm, and this blue is still sparkling. So I was just captivated, and we were sort of talked into three. Three were offered, and not knowing anything about birds, really nothing about birds, I took three, two males and a female, which was not a proper ratio, to say the least. So that's how it was just sort of an impulsive, odd decision. We had visions of peacocks wandering our yard. That has never ever happened. They have been caged since day one, and then they've just stuck around for a few years.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, I love that it's not just the one. You came home with three, and then having to buy like heat lamps and everything just because you had nothing. It's not like you had prepared for this day by any means. There was no preparation, and I kind of love that impulse decision. You went all in on this.
Well, it's just one of those things where whoever thinks you can have a peacock.
Yeah.
I've since learned that there are a lot of people who think they can have a peacock. There's a lot of peacock farmers, but it just never occurred to me, and it seemed too good of an opportunity to pass up.
Yeah. Can you talk about the moment you say early on in the book? I think like right in the very first page, like the only reason to own a peacock is the color and the feathers.
Yes.
What were that? So and then you emphasize just color and the feathers, and of course that's everybody's first inclination of how whimsical it could be. When is the first moment that you started to realize how false that statement ended up being? There's many events that's it's all chronicled here in the book, but can you talk about like the first moment where you're like, feathers are just that's not even priority right now. It's XYZ, that kind of thing.
Yes. Well, there are some plot points, as you know, that I don't quite want to give away, but it actually started within a few weeks, and it wasn't the feathers at all. It was Ethel, the peahen right over my shoulder there. Peahens are not fabulous. They're sort of dowdy little birds. They're very hardworking. They do all of the work. But Ethel from the beginning was the curious one, the inquisitive one, the social one, and she was the one who would always, come shouting up to me when I came in. She studied me, seemed to study me. She was the one who wasn't skittish, and it was, we already had these chickens that chickens sort of threw me for a loop too. I thought those were just odd little things that would scamper around the yard, but chickens have big giant personalities, and so did Ethel. And it was like, there's actually more to this bird than being pretty, especially because Mr. Pickle in the beginning was not pretty. He didn't put those feathers up for a while, and Carl was just a wreck. But anyways, it started with
background, or is that Carl? Is that
it's both of them actually. So Carl is the first one, and Mr. Pickle is on the other side of some chicken wire. I have to separate them during breeding season because they try to kill each other. So I'll take that down in mid-July, and they'll be fine again. They'll be a big happy family. But for now, they try to kill each other.
Yeah. I was talking to my dad this morning, and he was asking, "Oh, what are you doing today?" And I told him, and he was so fascinated. He lives in Florida. He said, "But you might try telling Mr. Flynn, don't put two males in the yard." He knows, Dad. Trust me, he knows. I
didn't know in the beginning. I had to learn that one.
Yeah. Can you talk about? I'm so curious too about how you went into this, and it was I think when people think of the peacock, they think of course the male, and I love how you describe Ethel so much throughout. She's kind of the heroine a little bit, through this book. But I wondered if you can talk a little bit, expanding out to moments where, what I also love about this book is when I read about animals, a lot of times it's a single person and they find a connection with animals, and that's the book. What I love in particular about your book is that there's a whole family involved. Your sons are a part of it, your wife is a part of it. It is not just a solo effort. So can you talk a little bit about too, like, I think that's also very something that distinguishes this book from others, is that this is not a solitary, triumphant, man and animal living in harmony. It's a family really kind of trying to bring this up together. So can you talk about the impact that having these three peacocks has had on your family? If you can narrow it down to like maybe one or two significant kind of maybe a delight, and maybe a one of those shaking my fist in the air, why did I do this to my family, that kind of thing. Or maybe I should be asking this of your wife.
She would probably be better on the shaking the fist part. To see this, we were just talking about our kids before we came on here. To see a 9-year-old light up around this big giant bird. It's one thing to have a snake, to have a chicken, but when he's in this big pen with this, really enormous bird, and when you're down at their level, they look like dinosaurs. Big blue dinosaurs, a little scary, but they get those feathers up, and you're right next to them, and to see that sort of wonder. And I know this sounds almost like a pat little stereotype, but it's this connection that you can see this young mind making with these animals. But then the shaking the fist part, there were some unforeseen expenses.
Yeah, I didn't realize how expensive. I guess I should have figured it out, but there was a lot of expense going through here when I was reading this.
It was really that one significant event. I was sort of, it had been this point of pride for me that their big giant cage was built out of garbage. It was just built out of scraps laying around the road. But over time, events happen, and I'm not a farmer. This isn't like a cost benefit analysis where, okay, this livestock's getting in the way. These are pets, and you take care of your pets, and that has caused some consternation at times. And they've also taken a lot of space, which Louise had initially agreed on 1 peacock, and we had 6 at one point. We're down to 5. 1 died, but there are still 5 here, and they take up about 3 times more space than they were supposed to. So she's been very tolerant.
Yeah. I wonder too, and that kind of actually, it's a perfect segue. My other question kind of leads right into your marriage with Louise. How has that impacted? Can you talk about like the impact of of having at one point 6 peacocks in a marriage while raising 2 boys? I'm so, because it's so rare for me to encounter a book that talks about family and animals together. Can you zone in, as comfortable as you want to be without revealing like deep family secrets here, just the impact on a marriage, on a love story with the addition of peacocks here?
Sure. It's Louise has always been very, very understanding with this whole thing. We got the peacocks at a time when I was sort of transitioning out of one line of work into another line of work, and trying to sort some things out that I didn't quite realize I was sorting out. But she knew that ahead of time. She knew it before I knew it. So she knew that there was a reason I wanted these birds around, as thankfully my editor Simon and Schuster knew before I knew. So she's always been very, very tolerant. There have certainly been some times some of the expense was unforeseen, and some of the space. So there's been a little prickliness there, but always very brief. It's if anything, the peacocks are definitely mine at this point. They're I mean, I guess officially they're the family's birds, but I'm pretty much the only one who pays attention to them. But she's always been very, very tolerant of it. And I think she's been relieved that, and she put it to me once, it's cheaper than dental implants or a sports car. So if you're gonna have a midlife crisis, peacocks are pretty good.
I was not gonna use the word midlife crisis, but
I wouldn't call it a crisis either, but
yeah. I love that. I love too that that tenderness is very evident throughout this book, so that it's not just, when you first pick this up and there's no mention of family or love in the title alone, on the cover alone. But that was, I think, the biggest surprise for me, and the biggest delight for me, is seeing how much tenderness and how much love really is throughout, and how much care really is given throughout this whole collection. One part that was hard to read, but I'm so glad that you brought it up, was just kind of, the instances where humans, for lack of a better word, did not interact with peacocks in the greatest way. I'm thinking of what is it? The Sandra Maloney who killed a peacock. That was so hard for me to read,
yeah.
And situation.
And was acquitted.
Yeah, and was acquitted because like a little loophole in it's Hawaii, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Hawaii.
Yeah. They've since changed the law.
Yes,
But,
I'm
yes.
so glad to see that. But and just all the people who think that they can raise or who can have one in their yard, and where it doesn't work out for various reasons. What was, when you were doing the research, or just kind of investigations of these situations, what was the hardest, like, how did you, I guess I'm wondering, just from a writer to another writer, how did you, or how was your response to like, I guess, how did you separate yourself from not wanting to say, how could you do this, don't you know, like, like you don't ever do this with peacocks, or how do you not come off, because that was also, I thought, a beautiful strength of this book. You don't ever come off as high and mighty, like, oh, I'm the peacock expert now, I mean, it's very
yeah, I'm not.
but you'd be surprised, there's so many books I can think of as that are very much as like, oh, I messed up, but now I'm the expert, and this is why you should listen to me. Yours is
You shouldn't.
yours is self-effacing the whole way. And also, even when you're describing the situations where humans did not do right by peacocks, there was a care there to get to details right. What was difficult about getting those stories? How do you separate, kind of, I don't know, maybe emotions from that? Or how do you, just from a craft point of view, how do you not come off as sanctimonious? Because you don't, and that's so hard. I want
Thank you.
other people to this is like, it teaches people how to not come off as sanctimonious jerks and Mr. Know-it-alls. And I wanted you to talk about a little bit about craft in that way. How do we get to learn so much without feeling stupid, that kind of thing? How did you do that?
So a big part of it is I've been a journalist my entire life. That's all I've ever done.
Yeah.
And most of that time I've written about really, really awful things.
Mhm.
I do a lot of mass murders. I do a lot of mass casualty events, or did at least, a lot of death. There's just I remember there's one number in the book, I've never counted how many, but in the first 9 years of my youngest son's life, my stories just for GQ involved 498 deaths. That's a lot of dead people.
Yeah.
So I developed, I think, a long time, and this was never anything I intentionally went into career-wise. It just turned out that, I was your basic city beat reporter, and there's a lot of crime. And then I went to magazines, and I people tell me things. I just became good at it. Being able to go someplace where something awful happened and listen to people tell me about it. And you can't tell those stories if you are not genuinely empathetic. I mean, you can never fake empathy. So I've always been genuinely empathetic, and sometimes you have to have not sympathy, but empathy for the bad guy. Everybody has their reasons for the awful things they do. Most of them are very, very bad reasons, but they have reasons. So I've had a lot of practice doing that. So going to talk about people who have tortured birds to death, that was, I mean, that was oddly enough one of the easier things to write about, because I'm so used to writing about those sorts of things. As for the rest of it, I learned very early on that when it came to these birds, I was in way over my head. I was just very, very lucky that one of the best avian vets in the country, which I didn't know beforehand, lives about 2 miles from me. And he walked me through a lot of this. And there's a wonderful feed store in Durham called Barnes Supply. They walked me through the rest of it. And a lovely ICU nurse who's retired, who raises a bunch of birds, named Valerie, and she walked me through the rest of it. So I had a lot of people holding my hand. And had I gotten sanctimonious and a big head over this, these birds would all be dead.
It's, and these birds are, as you said too, these are not just, it's not a hobby. These are your pets. You've taken care of them. I just wanted to reiterate like how much I adored your writing about this, because it would be easy to say, how dare you do this to these creatures? If you only knew them like how I know that, that kind of tone. But it was never like that. It was always this really generous curiosity and wanting to get to the heart of how do people do what they do, how did this happen, that kind of thing. I want to be sure we get to questions here and stuff, but I have one last question, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. So everybody tuned in, if you have questions, please definitely put it in the chat, and get ready for that. I guess, gosh, there's so much here I could talk to, but one thing, Sean, I didn't get a chance to tell you is I grew up with peacocks, the replicas, the feathers. I had peacock tapestries, statues all over my house, because as you know, it's the national bird of India. So it was like, and my father's from India, and so it was like growing up in this ultra patriotic home, like with American bald eagles all over the place. Shower curtains and things like that. So I was mortified as a kid, and now I kind of love that idea that I was surrounded by this magical, terrifying bird all the time. One thing I wanted to just kind of ask you is just your final thing, like what was the biggest surprise to you of all this? Now you've written the book. I'm not talking about your biggest surprise when you were raising them, but after, I feel often in poetry, I don't know what I wanted to say until after it's written, that kind of thing. What was the biggest surprise in this book that you pieced together after doing interviews with several people, with your own kind of memoir bits of raising this gaggle of peacocks? What was the biggest surprise to you in all of this that you uncovered?
I fear that this will be anticlimactic and might even give away the ending. But Reverend Dean Daniel at St. John the Divine told me something. Where they have peacocks, told me something.
Hang on one second, Sean. Can you repeat that just at the?
Oh yeah, I can't tell if they're So the Reverend Dean Daniel at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York, where they have peacocks. I was talking with him, and he told me once, I was musing about how it was a miracle that these birds had survived long enough to evolve. Bright blue bird in the jungle with a big handle on the back for a jaguar to get it. This is before I knew anything about animals or peacocks in the wild. And I was saying that just seemed like a miracle. And Dean Daniel was feeding one of their peacocks almonds at the time, and he said, after a very long pause, he said, maybe a miracle is just life in God's kingdom slowed down enough for us to appreciate it. And as the months went by and then years went by, and I realized that everything that we find, a peacock does not realize we find it beautiful. A peacock doesn't care. We project all sorts of things onto the peacock. He's vain, he's arrogant, he's flashy. He's just a bird. And that was figuring out that these were birds with their personalities and their foibles and their charms, and they didn't really care what we were projecting onto them, was weirdly soothing, if that makes sense. That there he goes. They just wanted to slow down and be appreciated, which I know which was, yeah, I feared it might be a little anticlimactic, but that really was sort of the meaning that I found in all of this, that I can just slow down and appreciate my birds.
Absolutely. That is not anticlimactic at all. I just wrote a book about slowing down and appreciating, that kind of thing. And yeah, a lot of editors were like, "Is that really the biggest thing you could say?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's important. It's important. It's so important." So no, that's why I was so looking forward to chatting with you, because this speaks to me on so many levels, but also I think it just speaks to a general audience of people wanting to slow down, but not knowing how or why or what lessons can be learned by slowing down. And I think this book does it so beautifully. It just happens to be with my favorite bird on the planet, So thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad. Well, thank you. This has really been a treat for me. I really do appreciate it. And thank you so much for the kind words.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is going to be, I'm even more, I was already insufferable talking about peacocks, but now I'm dropping so many facts that I didn't know, just from reading your book and the different metaphors you used, even like saying like a blue handle in the jungle.
Yeah.
I love that so much. So
Thank
yeah.
you.
So we'll open it up, I think.
Absolutely.
I see one question here. I think what they're asking, they're talking about, the feathers on the males are so pretty, and they were asking, do people ask if they can like get one that's fallen off, or have you ever had anybody try to steal a feather from one of them?
So no stealing, because they
Okay.
are in a big cage. But we have so many feathers. So this enormous rig it falls off every year. They're going to have those until July, maybe early August. It's all going to fall off, and they'll be short, stubby little birds. They look ridiculous without them, and they'll start growing it back again. It's this enormous expenditure of metabolic energy. I mean, their feathers are longer than their body. They're huge, but there's a couple hundred of them. And we have 2 birds with a couple hundred feathers each, and they all fall out every summer. So we got a lot of feathers. We give a lot away. If anyone would like a feather, happy to oblige. So, yeah, we have never said no to anybody.
Yeah, to anybody getting a feather. They're beautiful. Let's see here. Are there any sibling rivalries between your boys and the birds?
None. The boys have now gone deep into adolescence, and they ignore the birds. Their friends will come over and they'll be interested, and they'll bring them out and show them the birds, and let them in the pen and walk around. But no rivalry on the birds.
Yeah. I was going to ask, it's not really a question, but I felt like people might, because we're in the South, might enjoy hearing about the time that you were talking about. You met someone, I can't remember what his name was, maybe Rick, who said that he had sold peacocks to another writer.
Yes, Ray Watts.
Very famous.
And yes, he didn't actually. So Ray Watts was a great guy. I met him at the 25th annual United Peafowl Association convention, and that is an honest to God real thing that I have paid dues to. We were in a hotel bar, and I was talking to Ray and another guy, and we were talking about what we did. This other fellow, Mark, was a retired fireman, and Ray was a peacock farmer, and I was a writer. And Ray got a little sort of wistful there and said, I sold birds to some other writer once. It was a funny name, and he kept talking about this, and like he was trying to remember the name, and he mentioned up in Milledgeville. I was like, was it B. Flannery O'Connor? He's like, that's it. Of course, it wasn't actually Flannery O'Connor. It was, she's been dead since the 60s, but he said, I sold them to her museum. So yeah, that was we'd always wanted to get down to Milledgeville, and we never managed to get around to it. But
I was about to ask that, because I knew in the book you had said that you hadn't, but I didn't know if maybe at this point you had.
Still haven't. Nope.
No. What was there just like, because I know you're a writer, obviously, but was there just a point where you're just like, I'm going to have to write a book about my peacocks. Like, how did that just you just made a decision that that was what your next project was going to be?
I did not. I have a brilliant editor at Simon and Schuster. I was between projects. I just gotten the Peacocks in July, and that fall I was up in New York having some meetings with some different editors. And Sean Manning at Simon and Schuster, we went out to dinner and we had a few drinks, and he asked what I was doing, and I was honest with him. I said, I don't know yet. I'm just finished this, and I'm trying to look for this, and just mostly hanging out at home with my weird pets. And I didn't even lead with the peacocks. I led with Tater, the pug, who I'm still very conflicted about. And I said, so I've got this pug I'm very conflicted about. I've got these peacocks. I've got these chickens I taught how to do tricks, which is true. And he stopped me and said, wait, what? You have peacocks? And it was his idea. He said, he called me the next day. He said, I've been thinking about this, and there's a book in peacocks, and nobody's ever done one before. I didn't see it. And I told him that. And he said, well, you have to look at it the right way. You spent 30 years flying around the world writing about death. And then you retreat to your little fake farm in North Carolina and hang out with your magical, mythological, immortal birds. I think you should figure out why you're doing that. There's a story in there. So it took a few years. It took actually about 3 years, but he was right. It's and there were some things I didn't really want to think about too much, but eventually I did. And I think Sean was right. It was a sharp-eyed editor, really. I mean, I never write about myself, ever. So it's really hard, I think, to see a story in yourself. But Sean, God bless him, saw a story there.
Well, I think I'm making sure I don't have any more questions. I'm looking in the comments and the Q&A, but I think we're good. Okay, just double checking that I don't miss anything. Well, thank you so much, Sean. Thank you so much, Aimee, for being here. I know that we've put over in the chat that you can get book plate signed copies of Why Peacocks at Lemuria and at Square Books. We both have them, so whatever store you're closest to. Somebody did ask, what are you writing next? I'm sorry, they just asked it.
I actually have a piece out in Garden and Gun about another peacock farmer. That's just out now. I'm actually working on a podcast, 5 hours on a Bering Sea shipwreck for Audible. That'll be out sometime later this year. Like all good magazine writers, I'm moving to audio. We're all casualties of the business.
Well, I just didn't want to miss that question because I'm sure, we wanted to know. But I just want to make sure everybody knows that if you want a signed copy, you can get those at Square Books or Lemuria. Thank you to Square Books for doing this with us. Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Aimee. This was great and a lot of fun.
So fun. I'm gonna
thank you. I really appreciate it.
I'm gonna take you up on that, Sean, and stop by and get some feathers for me and my son soon.
Absolutely. Send me an address. I'll even mail them to you.
Oh my God.
Yes, make a bouquet.
Exactly. I've given away a few of those.
Thank you.
Okay.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for doing it in the pen. That was really great.
Yes.
Absolutely. Just in time, the chickens are picking a fight with the peahens right now. So,
oh my God.